when I met Aafia, and I started learning about her case, really it's the one that shocks me more than anything else. She's the only person we have a detailed history of who was put through the whole rendition to torture program by the Americans who was a woman.
In the wake of the September 11 attacks in 2001, the US president at the time, George W. Bush, launched what he called the Global War on Terror. In the process, Bush authorized new policies and programs to hunt down and punish those who the Americans accused of being responsible. That included the CIA transferring suspects to black sites around the world and to the US military prison in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Many people were held without charge, without evidence, and subjected to what became known as enhanced interrogation techniques. Taking center stage today is Clive Stafford Smith, a civil rights lawyer and counsel for multiple Guantanamo prisoners. His highest profile case and most notorious is that of Aafia Siddiqui. Aafia Siddiqui was once one of the FBI's most wanted suspects, today serving an 86-year prison sentence in Texas. Her story is intrinsically linked to the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, but more than 20 years later, Aafia's ordeal is far from over. Our guest, Clive Stafford Smith, shares the details of her case and explains why he believes her story is an example of some of the shadiest dealings and shocking methods that the Americans used to find and prosecute someone perceived as an enemy of the state. Clive Stafford Smith, thank you for joining us on Center Stage.
It's great to be here.
In January 2023, you took on the case of Aafia Siddiqui, a 52-year-old woman serving an 86-year prison sentence in Fort Worth, Texas, for attempted murder. Tell me why you decided to represent her.
Well, I was in Pakistan, actually, and I'd just got 3 of my Pakistanis out of Guantanamo. And Aafia's older sister, Fauzia, who, if you're ever in trouble, you want to have Fauzia as your sister, she collared me and said, would I go see Aafia? And stupidly, I thought, oh, well, I just got rid of 3 of my clients, so now I must have time. So I went to see Aafia in Texas because I was going there on a death penalty case. And oh boy, when you meet her, it's very hard to say no.
You've had a great deal of experience with Guantanamo Bay. You have seen many prisoners, the traumatizing effect it's had on them. What makes Aafia's case different from those others you've represented?
Well, you're right. I mean, I've had 87 people I've represented in Gitmo and various others elsewhere. And I will say, speaking as an American, if you transported me back to 2000, it would never occur to me that I would spend so much of my life talking to people about how America has tortured them. But when I met Aafia, and I started learning about her case, really, it's the one that shocks me more than anything else. When she was first abducted and sold for a bounty to the Americans by the Pakistanis, it wasn't just her. She had her 3 children along. And the very first thing that happened was apparently they dropped one child on his head.
This was the baby, 6 months old.
Suleiman, and apparently killed him, although no one's ever admitted that. And they took the other 2 kids, aged 3 and 6, took them 1,000 kilometers up to Afghanistan and did pretty unspeakable things to them too. And I think, and you don't have to be a parent to realize that that's something that's about as shocking as anything you could do.
So maybe we set the scene. On September 11th, 2001, you have the deadliest attack on US soil that came to be known as 9/11. This event shakes the country to its core. It has such an effect on the American psyche. And that's important because it sort of explains the series of
and with that,
events that then unfolded, right?
I mean, you probably remember, as I remember, where you were on 9/11.
Everyone remembers, I think, where they were.
I was in Louisiana, and suddenly the whole place was a ghost town. And I have to say, since I was born and raised in Britain, I totally underestimated the impact of 9/11 on America.
At the time or now?
At the time.
Okay.
And so when all of this stuff started happening, and they were talking about invading Afghanistan and then Guantanamo and all these things, I thought, this is mad. This is a terrible idea. And the first thing I was going to do was sue them over it, and I could find no one among my liberal defense lawyers doing death penalty work.
Because that was the magnitude
It was amazing,
of what had happened.
It had totally shaken America up.
Well, 5 days later, on September 16th, 2001, President George W. Bush declares the crusade, the war on terror against al-Qaeda and terrorist groups. Where is Aafia Siddiqui at this point? Where is she living and what is she doing?
Aafia was just finishing off her PhD. So she had done an undergrad degree at MIT and then a PhD at Brandeis. And, this is actually the first place that everything goes wrong for her, because everyone has always thought that she was some sort of scientist person who could do all these things. She was really an educationalist.
This is the basic facts of the case, that even her profession and her expertise, there is misinformation about this.
They honestly thought that she was, because she went to MIT, some sort of physicist who could make a nuclear bomb. Whereas I've had really interesting chats with her about her PhD thesis, and it's about how to teach your children things.
But the terrorism charges were never actually brought against her.
She's never been charged with anything.
At MIT, when she was studying, who were her friends, who were her colleagues?
She was, she was young, she was a student, she was already, she's a sincere Muslim. She's not the extremists that some people make out. But, she was passionate about certain causes. She was passionate, for example, about how there shouldn't be a genocide against Muslims in Bosnia. But I seem to recall so was President Clinton. And so she was involved in some of those causes, but she was most involved in trying to get her education degree so she could be an educationalist.
Because there are allegations that she had ties to al-Qaeda and that she might have been involved in fundraising for the group.
Yeah, that's total nonsense. I mean, if anyone has ties to al-Qaeda, it's me. I represented dozens of them, but not
Bold statement. On September 17th, President Bush issued a secret memo that empowers the CIA to move against groups that might be planning terrorist activities. And this bit is maybe relevant to Aafia and many others that you've represented. 1 day later, he signs into law the authorization for the use of military force. What does that allow the government to do?
Well, it's a very good question what it really allows the government to do. What unfortunately it let the government do was institute a whole process of rendition to torture. Now, they call it extraordinary rendition, or I really don't know what ordinary rendition is. It's called kidnapping in normal language. And when I first went to Guantanamo Bay, I thought I was going to have a lot of explaining to do for a lot of people who really were captured on the battlefields of Afghanistan. And I got down there and I had a devil of a time finding people who had actually ever been on the battlefield of Afghanistan. And honestly, I couldn't understand it for a long time until I learned about the bounty program. And it turns out that the US was offering a lot of money to people in Pakistan, particularly, but also Afghanistan, to turn in people who supposedly were fighters. And one thing I always like to ask my students is, I'm offering you $250,000 here to turn one of your colleagues in for being in Tora Bora in 2002. Are you going to take it?
I mean, I like to think that I wouldn't, but hey if my circumstances were different.
Got to pay that mortgage off. I'm afraid that's a huge amount of money to people in certain parts of the world. And it's actually President Musharraf, who boasts in his book that more than half of the Guantanamo prisoners were literally sold to the US for these bounties. And they weren't in Afghanistan. A lot of the people, including someone like Mohammed El-Ghorani, age 14, was in Karachi, had never been to Afghanistan. But they were turned in for all this money, along with a story about how they were al-Qaeda. And thereby begins the vicious cycle.
Right.
Because if I were to say to you, Mariam, are you a member of Al-Qaeda? What are you going to say?
Absolutely not. Yeah.
Okay, now I'm going to slap you, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Are you a member of Al-Qaeda?
Well, it depends how many times you
Well, I've slapped
slap me
you quite
and
a
then
few
what have you.
times.
Yeah, yeah. So they were tortured into
you
confessions,
say
yeah.
And the people who are doing that torturing
Yeah.
are not doing it because they think you're innocent. They're doing it because they think you're lying. And when you finally admit you are a member of Al-Qaeda, they think, aha, we were right all along. And this is what was going on. And I think it's a big mistake to think that these are all evil torturers who are trying to take innocent people and put them in prison. It's much more dangerous than that. They're going to put you in prison, and then you've now confessed that you're Al-Qaeda. And at that point, how are you going to prove you're not?
Why did the Americans accept
what?
Those stories?
Well, because
I mean,
they'd paid good money.
Yeah.
Someone said that Mariam is a member of Al-Qaeda. I've now got you to admit you are. So
The Americans have got them to admit.
Yeah, but we thought you were to begin with because some informant told us, normally from the Pakistan military. I think the intelligence people have been unbelievably naive. One of my guys, Binyam Mohammed, who some people will be familiar with, confessed when he was being abused that he knew how to build a nuclear weapon. Now, the Americans were obsessed with this, understandably. You know, they're really paranoid about Al-Qaeda getting nuclear weapons. But it wasn't until I got in as his lawyer that we were able to get the real story out, which was that he had said that you get uranium, you put it in a bucket, you swing it around your head for 45 minutes. That divides uranium-235 from uranium-239. Bob's your uncle, that's your weapons grade.
He was tortured into saying this.
He was tortured into saying that. But then this filters back through Chinese whispers to the White House, and John Ashcroft, Attorney General of the United States, interrupts his visit to Moscow to say, we've just solved a nuclear bomb plot. It's just shocking, but that's one example of literally hundreds of things that I've come across over the last few years.
We go now from 2001 to 2003. You have 9/11. You have various changes that the Bush administration puts into place in order to prosecute this war on terror. You have the invasion of Afghanistan. Where is Aafia now?
In 2002, Aafia was in Boston, and she was living with her husband. There was an incident where Amjad, the husband, had bought various things on the internet, which included night vision goggles. Now, he's Muslim, and I speak again as an American when I say, and I'm sorry about this, I really think it's awful, the prejudice we had against Muslims after 9/11 was awful. The FBI went by Amjad and Aafia's apartment, confronted Amjad with the stuff he'd bought. He says, oh, well, I'm a hunter and, this is why I get them. And they took that at face value. I'm amazed by that. I'm amazed he wasn't arrested on the spot, actually, under those circumstances. But all of that went into the files that would later get reviewed by, some intelligence person, somewhere in Washington. And all of this begins to add up to a portrait, allegedly, of Aafia and her husband.
She has 3 children at this point.
She had 2 at that point.
She had 2 at that point. So then how does she go from living there to being back in Pakistan?
She wanted to go back to her family in Karachi. Amjad hadn't finished his medical degree, so he wasn't quite so keen. He wanted to finish it. But they went back to Karachi, and that's where their marriage really fell apart. They got into a very bitter divorce. She was then pregnant with their 3rd child, Suleiman, who was born in September 2002.
She's taking a taxi to Karachi airport. They're going to fly to Islamabad because she has plans now for her career.
As they're going to the airport, and Aafia really blames herself for getting the taxi to take a back route. But it's then that these cars surround their car, and what happens is this. So there are all these goons, pull first the 2 older kids out. There's Ahmed, age 6, Mariam, age 3, and they put them in another car. Ahmed recalls, but he was a very traumatized 6-year-old, he recalls looking out through the back window and seeing Suleiman, the 6-month-old, on the ground with blood surrounding him, thinking that he'd fallen on his head. That's actually the only source we have for the fact that Suleiman may be dead, and we don't know for sure. But at the same time, Aafia's dragged out of the car herself and put in another car. She's the only person we have a detailed history of who was put through the whole rendition to torture program by the Americans, who was a woman. And I thought originally, there's going to be a lot of explaining to do about what happened to these people. But this is ultimately the reality. And these are the figures of the United States government, not me. There have been 780 prisoners in Guantanamo. If you set aside the 9 people who sadly died there, that's 771. There are only 13 of them who haven't been cleared as being effectively innocent. So 99.5% of the people in Guantanamo Bay have been released, for which you need a finding by the 6 top intelligence agencies of America that they're no threat to anyone. They're not the worst of the worst terrorists in the world. These are the American statistics. The catastrophe of our intelligence in Guantanamo, and I've seen a lot of this over the last 20 years, is just unbelievably bad.
Americans were offering, as you said, huge amounts of money for people, and with Aafia, I think it was $55,000 reportedly paid to people allied with then Pakistan President Musharraf to abduct her and turn her over to the Americans. But as you said, the thing that distinguishes her case from the others is the children. Yeah. She had 3 small children with her.
The children is really something. So Ahmed, who I've talked to about this, he's now 26 and he's a qualified doctor, a really delightful young man, but deeply traumatized. And he recounts how he was taken to a dark room, really dirty place, held there for a little bit. Then he's a US national, right? Because he was born in the US. Then he's taken by the US 1,000 kilometers from where he was in Karachi to Kabul and put in a prison. And he's in a prison for the next 5 years. What are you doing? I just think this is so deranged that America would do that to him. Then you've got Mariam, who was 3, and she was taken again to a dark room, a separate dark room from Ahmed, and then she was taken up to Kabul, where she was forcibly adopted into a family of American white Christian people, Josh and Natalie, who had to have been intelligence agents there in Afghanistan, and she's held by them in adoption, but she's called Fatima, and she's held there for 7 years.
They were taken from Pakistan to Afghanistan. Aafia is imprisoned. Ahmed, who's 5 or 6 years old, is put in a juvenile prison. He's told his name is Ali and to never speak of any of this again. And Mariam becomes Fatima and is adopted by a white American couple living in Kabul.
On the apparent theory that, you're better off being a white Christian American than a Pakistani Muslim of a certain color.
Aafia now is in prison. And
well, you say that,
right?
But the Americans deny it.
The Americans deny it.
The Americans deny to this day that Aafia was in a secret prison in Afghanistan.
Where was she?
According to the US, they have all these different things. It's all nonsense. But they say she was wandering around Pakistan with her children and in fact was living in a place called Nazimabad in Karachi for 5 years, which is just a hop, skip and a jump from where her family lives. Total nonsense.
So the Americans are making false claims about her. There's a version where they're saying she was just wandering around aimlessly, and, but she is during this time in Bagram.
Well, the only reason we know that is because I've been there several times and found a bunch of prisoners who were in Bagram with her. But the first one was a guy called Salim Kuche. Salim came forward because he's been itching to tell someone this for the last 15 years. So he told me the whole story about how he was in the isolation place and Aafia was being held in this little wooden box.
How did he know it was her?
Well, this was obviously my question, and I started talking to all sorts of other people who claimed the same thing. So first, she was Pakistani, spoke Urdu, everyone recognized that. Second, what happened was that, and I've been to Bagram and I've talked to lots of people who were there at the time, that there were no showers and toilets in the ISO area, and so they had to take this woman from there to the showers. They would put a towel over her head, but a lot of the time that came off, and they all saw her. And so they were really upset about this.
The male prisoners were upset that when this woman that she was there, or that they were able to identify that she was even there.
And then what happened is when they got out, they saw pictures of her, and a whole series of independent people recognized her as the woman they'd seen them. There's no question she was abducted with the children. We have a recording of one of the officers who did it. He didn't know he was being recorded at the time, but he boasted about everything they did. So then for the Americans to be telling the truth, they have to have let her go. That never happened. She's told me what happened to her, and she was later then taken to a women's prison, a women's place. It was some dark site, where she was in a room with 2 Afghan women. And, you know, this is where it gets really, really awful. She was raped by the guards. They were Afghan guards. She describes getting with the other women, tying their hands together. So when this guard came in the next day, they took him down and beat him up. You know, more power to her, frankly. But then she was put in an isolation cell and the abuse got worse. While she was in those prisons, the US had a one-way glass, and they were, you know, seemingly abusing children on the other side of the glass that she was meant to think were her children. The Spanish Inquisition 500 years ago knew that second-degree torture was worse than first-degree. You know, you can torture me, I'm not happy about it, but if you do something to my son in front of me, my child, you know, that's far worse. And Aafia told me about this. She said, I had to stop them doing this. And in the end, the only thing I could think to do was pretend I didn't care, because I thought that was the only way to stop them abusing those children in front of me. And what a place to be in, to have that thought going through your head.
In part 2 of this episode, civil rights lawyer Clive Stafford Smith talks more about the injustices around the imprisonment of his client Aafia Siddiqui, and how he says that through sheer luck, she barely escaped an attempt on her life. This is a very important element. Is it a discovery you've made recently that could be very important in this case?
She was going to go to Ghazni on this bus. She was going to be tarred as a suicide bomber, and she was going to be killed there.
To watch the conclusion of this episode, click on the link in the description.